Marcus Cole had not slept in 4 days. Not the kind of not sleeping where you toss and turn and stare at the ceiling and finally drift off around 3 in the morning. The kind where your body refuses entirely, where something inside the machinery has broken in a way that no one can find, no one can fix, and no one can explain. He lay in his bed in the small apartment in San Diego and felt his heart hammering at 130 beats per minute for no reason. No trigger, no threat, just his own body running at full speed toward nothing. He was 34 years old. He had served 12 years as a United States Navy SEAL. He had been a sniper. He had operated in places whose names he was not allowed to say at dinner tables, whose coordinates existed in files he would never see again. He had held his breath flat against the ground in temperatures cold enough to crack lips, waiting, watching, calculating. He had been the kind of man who could slow his own heart rate on command. He could not slow it now. The VA hospital in San Diego had a waiting room with blue plastic chairs and a television mounted too high on the wall and a motivational poster that said "Strength through adversity." Marcus had sat in that waiting room 9 times in 8 months. He had sat across from 7 different specialists. He had given blood until the inside of his left arm looked like a map of failed attempts. He had been inside scanners that cost more than his car. He had answered the same intake questions so many times he had memorized the order and filled them in before the nurse even finished asking. Every result came back the same. Nothing wrong. But Marcus Cole had lost 31 pounds in 6 months without trying. His joints ached the way old wood aches before it splits. His vision blurred at the edges in the middle of conversations. He woke at 2 in the morning drenched in sweat, hands already moving toward something that was not there. Some trained response firing in the dark for an enemy that did not exist in that room. His appetite was gone, not reduced, gone. His son, Nathan, who was 15 and already taller than him, would put a plate of food on the kitchen table and sit across from him and watch him with a careful, quiet face. The face of a boy doing the math on a situation he was not ready to name out loud. That face was the thing Marcus could not stop thinking about. He had survived things that should have ended him. That was not pride talking, just arithmetic. He had survived a Black Hawk going down over terrain that was not on any public map. He had survived 2 rounds in the shoulder on a rooftop in a city whose name changed depending on who was drawing the map that year. He had survived dehydration so severe that the medic on site had looked at his blood pressure reading and gone quiet in a way that said more than words. He had survived all of it with the particular stubborn efficiency of a man who had decided, at a very young age, that dying was something that happened to other people. What was happening to him now did not have a name. That was the problem. You cannot fight something that has no name. You cannot prepare for it, adapt to it, or drive a strategy against it. He was 12 years trained in the art of identifying threats and neutralizing them, and he could not identify this one. It was inside him, quiet and patient and thorough, and no one in any exam room with any piece of expensive equipment had been able to tell him what it was. His ex-wife, Karen, had stopped calling in March, not out of cruelty, out of exhaustion. He understood that, or he told himself he understood it. She had spent 2 years watching him get worse, and watching the system fail to find a reason why, and there is only a certain amount of waiting a person can do before the waiting begins to look like something else. Nathan called every Sunday. He kept those calls short and cheerful, in the way teenagers keep calls short and cheerful, when they are trying not to say the real thing. Marcus had requested a transfer to a new care team in February. It had been approved in April. He had met the new attending physician, a man named Dr. Gerald Finch, who was competent and thorough, and who had the look of a man who had been thorough with too many patients for too many years, without enough resources to do it properly. Dr. Finch had reviewed the chart, ordered 3 new panels, and told Marcus with genuine concern that they were going to figure this out. That had been 6 weeks ago. The results, again, showed nothing they could point to. On the morning of the 10th appointment, Marcus drove himself to the hospital because Nathan was in school and there was no one else. He parked in the space reserved for veterans with mobility limitations, which he was now using without embarrassment, because his left knee had developed a grinding instability that made long walks a calculation. He walked through the sliding glass doors. He nodded at the man behind the front desk, whose name was Earl, and who had worked that desk for 11 years, and always said good morning. in a way that meant it. Marcus took a blue plastic chair. He looked at the television, which was showing a morning news program with two people smiling at each other across a desk. He looked at the poster, Strength Through Adversity. He had a thought, flat and clear as a still pond. It is going to be something stupid, something no one thought to look at, something so obvious in hindsight that someone, somewhere, is going to feel terrible about missing it. He had seen that happen in the field. The thing that ended you was never the thing you planned for. It was always the thing that fell outside the category of things you planned for. He sat with that thought for a while. Then a woman he had never seen before came to the door of the waiting room and called his name. She was young, late 20s, maybe 30. She had dark hair pulled back, and she wore her badge on a lanyard that said temporary staff in small letters beneath her name. She did not have the particular brand of competent neutrality that he had come to associate with this facility's long-term staff. She looked at him directly when she called his name, and when he stood and walked toward her, she held the door open and said, "I pulled your chart this morning. I want to ask you some things that aren't on any of the forms." Marcus looked at her. "Okay," he said. He did not feel hope. He had used up his supply of easy hope somewhere around month 5. What he felt was something smaller and more cautious than hope. Something like the specific alertness of a man who has been watching a flat horizon for a very long time and has just seen the faintest change in the light. He followed her down the hall. The exam room was the same as every exam room. Paper on the table, antiseptic smell, a blood pressure cuff on the wall, a rolling stool and a chair, and a fluorescent light that buzzed faintly on the right frequency to give you a headache if you were sensitive to it. She sat in the chair, not on the stool. She had his chart open on her lap, and she was looking at it the way people rarely look at his chart, not scanning it for bullet points, not looking for the previous physician's note to confirm what they already thought. Reading it, actually reading it. He sat on the table. "My name is Laura Nolan," she said. "I'm on a contract rotation. I've been here 3 weeks." She said it plainly, like someone who understood it was relevant information and was not going to dress it up. "I want to ask you about your deployments. Not generally. Specifically." Marcus put his hands on his knees. "Go ahead," he said. Laura Nolan uncapped her pen. Outside the window, a maintenance truck was backing up across the parking lot. The reverse alarm beeped in a slow, patient rhythm. The fluorescent light buzzed. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang twice and stopped. Marcus Cole, who had not slept in 4 days, who had lost 31 pounds, whose son answered the phone with the voice of a boy already grieving, who had sat in 9 waiting rooms and heard nothing wrong 9 times, looked at this woman he had never met before in his life. And for the first time in 8 months he had the feeling, the specific, trained, bone-level feeling he had learned to trust above all instruments, and all data, and all official reports, that someone was actually looking in the right direction. He did not say that. He just began to talk. Laura Nolan had not planned to read Marcus Cole's chart that morning. She had been assigned to wound care and post-surgical follow-ups during her rotation at the VA facility in San Diego, which was exactly the kind of assignment you got when you were 3 weeks into a contract and had not yet established the kind of track record that earned you more complex cases. She was not bothered by this. She had learned in her years of nursing that the assignment on the paper and the actual work in front of you were frequently 2 different things, and that the space between them was where most of the real medicine happened. She had arrived at the nursing station at 6:55 that morning, a full 30 minutes before her shift technically started, because she was the kind of person who needed that window to read, to think, to get ahead of the day before the day got ahead of her. She made herself a cup of terrible coffee from the break room machine and sat down with the intake list. Marcus Cole's name was on it because he had been assigned a pre-appointment vitals check and nursing intake before his 10 o'clock with Dr. Finch. It was a routine task. It should have taken 15 minutes and produced a single paragraph of notes in his chart. She opened his chart to write down what she needed for the intake form. She did not close it for 45 minutes. It was not that the chart was dramatic. In fact, it was the opposite of dramatic. It was a very long document that described, in careful clinical language, a very large number of things that had been checked and cleared and ruled out. She was reading the shape of the negative space, She was reading what was not there, the category of thing that no one had yet named, the direction no one had yet looked. Laura had grown up in a small town in rural Ohio. Her father had worked in manufacturing. Her mother had worked in the school cafeteria. Neither of them had any connection to medicine, and no one in her family had ever gone to nursing school before her. She had gotten there through a combination of fierce academic focus and the particular stubbornness that grows in people who are told, gently and repeatedly throughout childhood, that their ambitions are slightly outside the realm of what people like them do. She had done 2 years of field placement after her certification, not in a hospital, in a rural clinic in the state of Guerrero in Mexico, working with a small NGO that provided healthcare to agricultural communities in regions where the nearest real hospital was several hours away, and the patients who needed it most were also the least able to get there. She had treated people in those villages who had no formal diagnosis, no chart, no previous physician's assessment. She had treated them by looking, by asking, by learning to read the body as a document, written in a language that was not always medical. In those villages, she had seen something specific, a pattern of symptoms in men who worked near fields, or who lived near fields, or who had lived near fields years before and moved away, but carried something with them that the fields had given them. Fatigue that went beyond exhaustion, neurological disruption, joint damage, thermoregulatory failure, cognitive interruption that came and went, and frightened the people experiencing it because they could feel themselves not being themselves and did not know why. She had learned what it was from a physician there, a woman named Dr. Claudia Mercado, who had spent 20 years building a vocabulary for what the standard textbooks did not yet fully describe: long-term organophosphate toxicity, systemic chemical damage from agricultural compounds that built slowly in the body over time, and mimicked, with frustrating precision, a rotating cast of other conditions. It looked like chronic fatigue. It looked like autoimmune disease. It looked like cardiovascular instability. It looked like early neurodegeneration. It looked like all of those things and none of them, because it was its own thing, and it required its own question to find. The question was specific. It was not on any standard intake form. It was not in the diagnostic protocol for multi-system dysfunction at the VA. It was the question Dr. Mercado had taught her to ask. Where exactly were you? And what was in the air? Laura sat with Marcus Cole's chart and felt the shape of the negative space resolve into something she recognized. She was careful with herself about this. She had been wrong before. Confidence in pattern recognition is a useful tool, and a dangerous one in equal measure. And she had seen what happened to nurses who arrived at conclusions before they had finished asking questions. She was not arriving at a conclusion. She was identifying a direction, a thread, a question she needed to ask. She went to Dr. Finch's office first. She knocked and entered and explained, concisely and without drama, what she had noticed in the chart and what she wanted to explore. Dr. Finch listened. He was not dismissive. She had worked with dismissive physicians and she could read that energy within 30 seconds. He was something more complicated than dismissive. He was a man operating inside a system with finite resources and an infinite caseload. A man who had learned, out of necessity rather than indifference, to triage his bandwidth carefully. He told her that the hypothesis she was describing was rare, that it was not well documented in veteran populations, and that the diagnostic pathway for it would require referral beyond his department's current scope. She thanked him. She went back to the nursing station. She picked up the chart again. She thought about the men in Guerrero who had not had someone to go back to, who had simply gotten worse in the absence of the right question. She thought about Nathan Cole, whose age was listed in the social history portion of his father's chart, 15, one dependent, and who, she calculated, had probably spent the last 8 months watching his father disappear one symptom at a time. She walked back to the intake area. She called Marcus Cole's name. When he stood from the blue plastic chair and walked toward her, she saw it immediately. Not the weight loss, though that was visible. Not the fatigue, though that was visible too. She saw the way he moved. Efficient, trained, still carrying the physical discipline of a man who had built his body into a precise instrument. And she saw how that precision was working now against something it could not fight, something it could not locate, and she felt the urgency of the chart click into something more specific than professional concern. This man had been trying to fight something with no coordinates. She was going to give him coordinates. She held the exam room door open. She sat across from him, in the chair, not on the stool, because the chair put them at the same level, and she needed him to feel that this was a conversation, not an assessment. And she opened his chart on her lap, and she looked at him, and she said the thing she always said at the beginning of the question Dr. Mercado had taught her. I want to ask you about your deployments. Not generally. Specifically. Marcus Cole put his hands on his knees. She watched him do it. She watched the particular stillness of a man who had been trained to give nothing away, deciding that this was, perhaps, a situation in which it was worth giving something. Go ahead, he said. She uncapped her pen. Every deployment, she said. Every location. And as we go, I'm going to ask you about the surrounding environment in each one. Agricultural areas, industrial areas, anything that was near your operating zone. I want to know about smells you couldn't identify. I want to know about times when you or your team felt physical effects that weren't explained by injury or illness. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, That's not something anyone has asked before. I know, she said. He began to talk. She wrote. Outside, the maintenance truck's reverse alarm continued its patient beeping, and the fluorescent light buzzed, and down the hall someone was laughing about something. The ordinary sound of ordinary morning in a building full of people who were trying their best with what they had. He talked for a long time. She let him. She did not rush him or redirect him or signal that she was waiting for a particular piece of information. She had learned in Guerrero that the answer was almost never the thing the patient led with. It was the thing that came after they trusted you enough to say the next thing, and the thing after that. He told her about a 6-week period of operations in a region he named with quiet precision, the kind of precision that had been drilled into him over years of operating in places where imprecision was fatal. He told her about a staging area near agricultural land. He told her about the smell. He described it without prompting, and when he said it, she stopped writing. He said it had smelled like cut grass and copper at the same time. That was the smell. That was exactly the smell that Dr. Mercado had described in the briefings she had given to the field clinic volunteers. That was the smell of aerial application drifting across terrain, of compounds in the air that had no business being breathed, of something settling into lungs and bloodstream and tissue and staying there, patient and quiet, doing its work over years. Laura set her pen down on top of the chart. She looked at Marcus Cole, who was looking back at her with the careful, neutral expression of a man who had learned not to need things from people and who was, in this moment, despite every defense he had built, needing something. She told him what she thought. She told him plainly, without softening it into vagueness, and without dramatizing it into something larger than it was. She told him that based on his symptom pattern, his timeline, his deployment history, and the environmental detail he had just described, she believed he had sustained long-term chemical exposure during that 6-week period, that his body was not malfunctioning or generating symptoms from nothing. It was responding, accurately and systematically, to a chemical injury that had never been identified, and therefore had never been treated. She told him that every physician who had seen him had been treating the symptoms. No one had gone looking for the source. Marcus Cole did not say anything for a long time. She let the silence sit. He looked at the floor. He looked at the blood pressure cuff on the wall. He looked at his own hands on his knees. Then he looked at her and said, quietly, and without any particular inflection, How long have you thought this? Since this morning, she said, when I read your chart. He nodded. The nod was slow. Processing. She had seen that nod before. Not in this building, but in the village clinic in Guerrero, on the faces of men who had spent years carrying something they did not have a name for, and had just been handed the name. There was relief in it, and something else too. Something that looked, from the outside, like grief, for all the time the not knowing had cost. What happens now? He asked. She told him. She told him that she was going to write a formal clinical recommendation, and that she was also going to contact a toxicologist she knew at a research institution in San Francisco. She told him it would not be fast. She was honest with him about that, because he was the kind of man who needed honesty more than comfort, and she could see that clearly. She told him the system was going to move at its own speed, and that she was going to push it as hard as she could from inside. She told him he had been right all along, Something was wrong. They just had not been looking in the right place. Marcus Cole sat on the paper-covered exam table in the VA medical facility in San Diego and listened to a contract nurse who had been in the building for 3 weeks tell him the thing that 8 months and 7 specialists and 9 appointments had failed to tell him. He did not cry. He was not that kind of man, and she had not expected him to be. But his shoulders, which had been carrying the exact specific tension of a man bracing against something he cannot see, dropped about 1/4 of an inch. She noticed. She capped her pen. She stood up and said she was going to start making calls. He said, "Thank you." She nodded. She picked up his chart. She walked to the door. Before she opened it, she turned back and said, "The smell you described. Cut grass and copper. You remembered that clearly." He said, "I remember everything clearly. That's kind of the problem." She opened the door and walked out into the hallway, where the ordinary sounds of the morning continued, and the fluorescent lights buzzed, and somewhere down the hall, Earl at the front desk was telling someone their appointment was in room 4. She had a lot of calls to make. She started making them before she reached the nursing station. The question Marcus Cole had been waiting for came out of nowhere. He had been asked 1,000 questions in that building over 8 months. He had answered questions about his diet, his sleep, his alcohol consumption, his stress levels, his physical activity, his family history, his childhood, his service record, and the current status of approximately 40 different bodily functions. He had answered them all honestly and thoroughly, and without complaint, because he was not a man given to complaint, and because he understood, at least in the abstract, that the people asking them were doing their jobs. None of those questions had gotten anywhere. The question Laura Nolan asked him in that exam room was different, not because it was complicated, because it was specific in a way no one had been specific before. She wanted to know where he had been. Not the general answer. The real answer. The one with coordinates and terrain features and the particular quality of the air on a particular morning in a particular region that showed up in no official summary of where he had been or what he had been doing there. He told her everything. He had not told anyone everything in a very long time. There were things in his service record that were classified and would remain classified, but the geography was not classified, not anymore, and the environmental details had never been classified because no one had thought they were worth classifying. They were just details. Background. The smell in the air during a 6-week operation was not the kind of thing that made it into after-action reports. But he remembered it. He remembered it because he had been trained to notice things other people did not notice, and because that particular smell had bothered him at the time in a way he could not articulate, and had therefore filed in the back of his mind under unresolved, where he kept the things that did not have a category yet. The smell of cut grass and copper in the air over terrain that was not agricultural, coming from a direction that did not correspond to any identifiable source. He had mentioned it to his team leader at the time. His team leader had said it was probably something industrial from further up the valley. They had moved on. They had a mission. The smell was not the mission. He told Laura all of it. The location, the timeline, the staging area near the edge of cultivated land, the direction the wind had been coming from, the duration of the exposure. She had stopped writing before he finished. He noticed that. He noticed her stillness. He had spent 12 years reading the body language of people in high-pressure situations, and he could read stillness the way other people read expressions. Her stillness was not confusion. It was recognition. When she told him what she thought, he listened to every word. He had a habit, developed over years of briefings where the information mattered enormously and the margin for misunderstanding was zero, of listening to things twice. He listened once while the words were being said, and once again in the silence after, where his brain ran back through them and checked them against what he already knew. So he listened to Laura explain what she believed was happening in his body, and then he sat in the silence after and ran it back through. It fit. Not perfectly. Nothing ever fits perfectly. But it fit the way a good map fits terrain. Not identical to the reality, but close enough to navigate by. It fit the timeline. It fit the symptom pattern. It fit the way the symptoms had accumulated slowly, not dramatically, the way a small leak accumulates into structural damage. It fit the absence of any single identifiable cause, because this was not a single identifiable cause. It was an accumulation. a long, slow chemical argument his body had been having with itself for years. He thought about the 7 specialists. He did not think about them with anger, which surprised him a little. He thought about them with the particular pragmatic clarity of a man assessing a tactical situation. They had been looking at the right map. They had been looking at the wrong quadrant. Laura left the room to start making calls. Marcus sat on the exam table for a few minutes without moving. He thought about Nathan. He thought about the Sunday phone calls and the careful, cheerful voice, and the plate of food left on the kitchen table. He thought about the last time Nathan had come to stay with him for a long weekend, and how Marcus had spent most of Saturday sitting in the armchair by the window, because the combination of fatigue and joint pain made moving around the apartment a project that required planning. Nathan had sat on the floor next to the chair, and they had watched 3 movies in a row, and Nathan had not said anything about it, had just sat there on the floor, close enough that Marcus could feel the warmth of him. He thought about that warmth. He thought about what it would mean to have a name for this. Not a cure, not yet. He was experienced enough with complicated problems to know that naming a thing and solving a thing were separated by enormous amounts of time and work. But naming it, starting somewhere that was the actual somewhere instead of a direction chosen because no other direction had been eliminated yet. He got down from the exam table. He straightened his shirt. He stood for a moment in the middle of the small room and felt the grinding instability in his left knee, and the blurred edge at the right side of his vision, and the low hum of fatigue that lived behind everything now, like a frequency he could not turn off. Then he walked out into the hallway. Laura was at the nursing station with her phone against her ear, writing on a yellow legal pad. She was talking to someone with the focused, efficient tone of someone who knew exactly what they needed and was not going to be sidetracked from getting it. She did not look up when he came out. He went to the waiting room to wait for his appointment with Dr. Finch. Earl at the front desk looked up and said, "How you doing today, Mr. Cole?" Marcus thought about it. "Better," he said. "Bit better." Earl nodded and went back to his computer. Marcus took a blue plastic chair. He looked at the television, which was showing a weather forecast. He looked at the poster. Strength through adversity. He thought, that is one way to put it. He thought, another way to put it is that sometimes the adversity is not the thing you can see. He pulled out his phone. He almost called Nathan. He stopped himself because Nathan was in school and also because he did not yet have the full shape of what he would say. He had the beginning of it. The beginning was, someone finally asked the right question. The rest of it was still being built. He put his phone away. He waited. Down the hall, Laura Nolan was on her second call. She had already left a message for Dr. Raymond Chu, a toxicologist at a research hospital in San Francisco, whose name she had gotten from Dr. Mercado years ago, during a brief professional exchange that had taken the form of a single shared conference panel and a card pressed into her hand afterward with the words, "If you ever have a case like this." She had never used the card. She had kept it in the small zippered pocket of her nursing bag for 2 years, moving it from bag to bag with the particular certainty of someone who does not know when a thing will be needed, but knows with confidence that it will be. She was now on the phone with a colleague from her Guerrero posting, a man named Kevin Marsh, who now worked in occupational health in Los Angeles, asking him to confirm the specific diagnostic criteria she was working from before she put them in writing in a formal clinical recommendation. Kevin asked her where she was working. She told him. He said, "You've been there 3 weeks, and you're already pulling threads like this?" She said. The thread was already there. Someone just had to find the right end. He gave her what she needed. She thanked him, ended the call, and started writing the clinical recommendation on the legal pad, which she would transfer to the formal documentation system before the end of the day. She wrote for 17 minutes without stopping. The fluorescent light buzzed. Down the hall, in the waiting room with the blue plastic chairs, Marcus Cole sat with his hands on his knees and looked at the weather forecast and breathed, slowly and deliberately, the way he had been trained to breathe in situations that required patience. He was good at patience. He had spent years being patient in difficult places. He could do it here. Nobody told Marcus Cole that the system would fight him. Not in those words. No one sat across from him and said, "This is going to be slow and grinding, and there will be weeks when nothing moves, and you will have to push the same door over and over again before it opens, if it opens, and there is no guarantee about the opening. Laura had been honest with him. She had told him it would not be fast. But honest and complete are different things, and neither she nor anyone else could have given him the complete version on that morning in the exam room, because the complete version could only be known from inside it, 1 week at a time. He found that out the hard way. Laura filed the formal clinical recommendation on a Tuesday. It was logged into his chart, assigned a review number, and routed to a department whose responsibility it was to review non-standard diagnostic hypotheses. She had been precise and thorough in her documentation, not general, not theoretical, but specific. The deployment history, the environmental exposure detail, the symptom correlation, the diagnostic framework from the published literature on occupational chemical toxicity, the contact information for Dr. Raymond Chu in San Francisco. The review department acknowledged receipt the following Friday. The actual review began 11 days later. Marcus counted the days. He was not an impatient man by nature. Patience had been trained into him so thoroughly that it was no longer a discipline, just a quality of his attention. But he had never before been waiting for something that was about his own body. And waiting for something about your own body is a different experience than waiting for anything else. Because your body does not stop while you wait. The symptoms do not pause out of courtesy, while the paperwork moves through the system. He still woke at 2 in the morning. His knees still ground when he walked downstairs. His vision still blurred at the edges. He still sat across from Nathan on Sunday calls and heard the careful, cheerful voice, and felt the weight of what he could not yet tell him. He told himself, one step at a time. He had operated in terrain where the path forward was invisible, and the only option was to move forward anyway, making the path by moving. He applied that logic here. Laura checked in with him twice a week. Not in any official capacity. His care was still technically managed by Dr. Finch, who had incorporated her hypothesis into the working picture with professional seriousness, if not yet with the resources to act on it decisively. She checked in the way people check in when they have taken on a thing personally rather than professionally, which is to say she texted him on Tuesday and Thursday mornings with brief factual updates. The toxicologist returned her call. The case summary had been forwarded. She was pushing. He wrote back with equal brevity. Understood. Thanks. Waiting. Dr. Raymond Chu called her on a Thursday morning, 6 weeks after she had left that first message. She stepped out of the building into the parking lot to take the call, because the signal was better outside, and because she did not want to have this conversation within earshot of the nursing station. She stood between 2 parked cars in the late morning sun, which was the warm, flat sun of a San Diego autumn, and she listened to a toxicologist with 22 years of research experience tell her that the case summary she had sent him was, in his professional opinion, consistent with a pattern of long-term occupational organophosphate exposure that he had seen documented in agricultural and military-adjacent contexts, and that he had, frankly, been waiting to see presented from a VA context for some time. He used the word frankly twice during that call. She noted it. It meant something. He said he was willing to formally review the case and provide a written assessment if the VA could facilitate the relevant records transfer. She wrote down every word he said. She went back inside. She filed the request for records transfer that afternoon. The records transfer was approved 23 days later. She kept a log on the yellow legal pad, not out of anxiety, but out of precision. She had learned in Guerrero that systems move on their own schedule, and that the people working inside them are not the system. The people inside them are just doing their jobs with the tools and the time they have. She did not carry anger about the pace. She carried a pen, and a legal pad, and a list of exactly what had been done, and what needed to happen next. She kept pushing. Marcus, in the meantime, was fighting a different fight. Not against the institution. He had enough experience with institutions to know that fighting them frontally was inefficient. He was fighting the daily one. The one that happened in his apartment before dawn. The one that happened on the stairs. The one that happened in the grocery store when the fluorescent lights made his vision blur, and he stood for a moment in the cereal aisle with his hand on the cart, waiting for it to pass. Nathan came for a long weekend in November. He was taller again, which seemed impossible, and he had the particular lanky uncertainty of a 15-year-old boy who was becoming something, but was not sure yet what. He made pancakes Saturday morning, which he had recently learned to do and which he made with unnecessary precision, measuring everything, checking the heat of the pan. Marcus sat at the kitchen table and watched him. Nathan put a plate in front of him. He sat down across the table and said, "Dad, are they figuring it out?" Marcus looked at his son. He said, "Yeah. Someone figured out where to look. Now they're looking." Nathan nodded. He picked up his fork. Marcus picked up his fork. They ate the pancakes. In San Francisco, Dr. Raymond Chu received the records transfer and spent 4 days reviewing the complete file. He had a research assistant compile the relevant literature on organophosphate exposure in military populations, sparse but present. He built the diagnostic framework. He sent his written assessment to Laura on a Tuesday morning. She read it standing at the nursing station. It confirmed everything. She went to Dr. Finch's office and put the assessment on his desk and stood beside his desk while he read it. She did not sit down. She watched his face as he read. He was a careful reader. He went through it twice. He looked up. "All right," he said. "Let's get him a referral to occupational medicine." It took 3 more weeks for the referral to be processed, approved, and scheduled. The appointment with Dr. Patricia Owen at the Occupational Medicine Department was the first appointment Marcus had attended in 8 months, where the physician reading his chart did so with the knowledge of what they were looking for. Dr. Owen sat across from him and read the chart and the toxicologist's assessment and looked up and said, "I'm sorry this took as long as it did." Marcus looked at her. He said, "Let's just talk about what comes next." She nodded. She respected that. She explained the proposed protocol, a careful, monitored program to support the body's processing of accumulated chemical load, alongside nutritional intervention and neurological support. She explained that it would be slow. She explained what progress would look like and what they would be watching for. She explained that the body was not failing. It was responding to something real, and now that something real had a name, they could address it directly. Marcus listened. He asked 3 questions, all of them precise, all of them practical. He took no notes because he did not need to. He filed everything she said in the correct place in his memory, where it would stay intact and available when he needed it. He walked out of the appointment and sat in his car for a few minutes. He did not call Nathan. Not yet. Not from the parking lot. He would call him from home, from the kitchen table, where he could say it properly. He called Laura. She answered on the second ring. He said, "It's Marcus Cole. I just came out of the occupational medicine appointment." She said, "How did it go?" He said, "They're starting a protocol next week." She said, "That's good. That's really good." He said, "You've been pushing this for 11 weeks. She said, "The chart was right there." He said, "A lot of people looked at that chart." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "They were looking at it for different things." He said, "Yeah." He started the car. He drove home. He sat at the kitchen table and called Nathan. Nathan answered on the first ring, which meant he had been waiting for the call, which meant he had somehow known that today was the day something would happen, the way teenagers sometimes know things they should have no way of knowing. Marcus said, "Hey, we've got a direction." Nathan said, "Yeah?" Marcus said, "Yeah. They know what's going on. They're going to start treating it next week. It's going to be slow, but it's going to work." The silence on the other end of the phone lasted about 4 seconds. Then Nathan said, in a voice that was not the careful, cheerful voice, not the managed voice, but the real one, "Okay, Dad. Okay." Marcus put his elbow on the kitchen table. Outside, a car drove past. Someone down the street was mowing a lawn. The ordinary world was doing its ordinary things. He sat there. He felt, for the first time in a very long time, the particular quality of stillness that is not emptiness but something close to rest. Marcus Cole did not get better all at once. That is not how it works, and he had known that from the beginning, and knowing it did not make it easier on the days when the progress was invisible. He had been told the protocol would take time. He understood time. He had patience built from years of operating in environments where impatience was fatal, but patience built in a professional context, and patience applied to your own body, are not the same tool. One is tactical, the other is something harder to name. He started the protocol in the first week of December. It involved a combination of medical treatment, careful dietary changes, and a set of supplements targeted at neurological and systemic support that Dr. Owen and the team had mapped out with the precision of people who had read every piece of available literature and were building carefully from it. He attended appointments twice a week. He followed the protocol exactly. He was not the kind of man who followed things approximately. The first month showed no visible change. He logged this without emotion. He had been told to expect it. The body does not reverse 8 years of accumulation in 4 weeks. The chemical load that had been building since that 6-week deployment had spent years settling into tissue and blood and nerve pathway, quiet and patient, doing its work. Undoing it required the same patience in reverse. He told no one it was hard. He told Nathan that it was going fine, which was technically true because fine did not mean fast. He told Karen, who had started calling again after learning there was a confirmed diagnosis and a treatment plan. Not the same calling as before, more careful, more measured, the calling of someone who is trying to recalibrate, that things were moving in the right direction. He told his old teammate Greg, who called from the East Coast every few weeks, that the doctors finally had a handle on it. He did not tell any of them about the 2 in the morning. That hour still came. He still woke up in it. The difference, slowly, was that he was starting to go back to sleep by 3. That was the first thing. By January, the second thing, his resting heart rate dropped by 8 points. He clocked it every morning on the cheap monitor he kept on his nightstand. 8 points was not dramatic. 8 points was real. He texted Laura on a Tuesday morning. He wrote, "Resting HR down 8 points from baseline." She wrote back within 3 minutes. Noted. That's early progress. Keep tracking. He kept tracking. In February, his knee, the grinding instability that had made stairs a calculation, became, not gone, but quieter, like a noise in a wall that has been reduced from a banging to a tapping. Still there. Smaller. He told Dr. Owen at his Thursday appointment. She made a note and said, "Joint symptom improvement is typically one of the later markers to show. If it's already presenting, that tells us something positive about the rate of response." He said, "What does it tell you?" She said, "That your body is doing the work." He sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "It always did the work. It just didn't know what it was working on." She looked at him over the top of his chart. She said, "That's exactly right." He gained back 7 pounds by the end of February. Not the 31, 7, but 7 in the right direction. 7 that felt like his body choosing to keep something rather than spending it. He noticed it first in his shoulders, a small return of the solidity that had always been there, that had been disappearing so gradually, he had not fully registered the loss until he began to feel it come back. Nathan noticed in March. He came for a weekend in mid-March, taller again, which truly did seem impossible. And on Saturday morning, he made pancakes again with the same unnecessary precision. And they sat at the kitchen table, and Nathan looked at him for a long moment and said, "You look different." Marcus said, "Different how?" Nathan said, "Like you're here." Marcus looked at his son. He said, "I am here." Nathan nodded. He went back to his pancakes. Marcus went back to his. The vision blurring reduced significantly by April. It did not disappear. Some days it was still there at the edges, a reminder of what had been there longer. But there were now full days, 3 in a row, then 5, where his vision was clear from waking to sleeping. He had forgotten what it felt like to have a full day of clear sight. When it came back, it was one of those recoveries that felt like remembering rather than gaining, like finding something you had stored somewhere and forgotten you owned. Laura finished her contract rotation in late March. She came to say goodbye at the end of her last shift. She found him in the waiting room. He had an appointment that afternoon with Dr. Owen, and she sat in the blue plastic chair next to him, with her coat over her arm and her bag on her shoulder, dressed in civilian clothes for the first time he had seen, which made her look younger somehow, or maybe just more herself. She said, "The paper's been submitted." He looked at her. "What paper?" She said that she and Dr. Chu had written up the case for a toxicology journal, anonymized, but complete. The diagnostic pathway, the environmental exposure history, the symptom correlation, the treatment response. She said it had been a long time coming, that this pattern needed to be in the medical literature where VA physicians could find it. That the next Marcus Cole, and there would be one, deserved not to wait 8 months. He said, "When will it be published?" She said, "Could be a year, could be longer. That's how publishing works." He said, "But it'll be out there." She said, "It'll be out there." He looked at the poster on the wall. He said, "What you did, that wasn't part of your job." She said, "Reading a chart is absolutely part of my job." He said, "You know what I mean." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know what the worst part of those 8 months was? For you?" He said, "Not knowing." She said, "No. The knowing. You knew something was wrong. You knew it every day. And the system kept telling you nothing was wrong. That's its own kind of damage, being told to not trust what you know." He had not thought about it in those words before. He turned them over. He said, "Yeah, that's right." She stood up. She picked up her bag. She said, "Take care of yourself, Marcus." He said, "You too, Laura." She walked out through the sliding glass doors into the parking lot, and he watched her go, and then he looked back at the television, which was showing a gardening program, which was unexpected, and he sat with his hands on his knees and breathed the way he had been trained to breathe. Over the following months, the progress continued its slow accumulation. The heart rate stabilized, the sleep lengthened, the knee stayed quieter. He regained 19 of the 31 pounds by the end of summer, and Dr. Owen told him that 19 was the realistic target for this phase, and that they would reassess in 6 months. He went to Nathan's baseball games, 3 of them in April. He sat in the bleachers with the other parents and ate bad food from the concession stand, and watched his son, who was not a natural athlete but was a determined one, do the thing he did with the focused earnestness of a teenager who had decided to be good at this. He drove home from the 3rd game on a Saturday afternoon in late April, with the windows down because the weather had turned warm, that particular early warmth that felt like a promise, and he had the radio on at low volume, something he had not been able to tolerate for months because the sound had added to the neurological overload that was one of the symptoms' quieter cruelties. The music was something he did not recognize. He did not reach to change it. He drove. The road was ordinary. The light was ordinary. The sound of the music and the wind through the window were ordinary. He had missed ordinary so specifically, for so long, that he almost could not locate the right word for what it felt like to have it back. Not happiness. Not relief. Those words were both too large and too small at the same time. Just, present, here, on a road in San Diego with the window down and the radio on, driving home from his son's baseball game, in a body that was, slowly and imperfectly, and not without ongoing difficulty, beginning again to feel like his own. He would call Nathan when he got home. He would not make it a big thing. Nathan did not need it to be a big thing. He would just call. He would say, "Good game." He would ask about the homework situation, which was always somewhat chaotic. He would let the call be ordinary. That was the whole plan. He turned onto his street. He thought about Laura Nolan, who was now in a community health clinic in East Los Angeles, who was probably right now asking someone a question that was not on any intake form, finding the right thread in a chart that no one else had found. He thought about Dr. Mercado in Guerrero, who had built a vocabulary for things the textbooks did not cover, and had pressed a business card into Laura's hand at a conference years ago, with the knowledge that it would eventually be useful in a way neither of them could predict. He thought about the chain of it, the length of the chain between a smell in the air over a staging area, and a woman reading a chart in a nursing station in San Diego, and a toxicologist in San Francisco getting a message he had been waiting for years to receive. He pulled into his parking space. He turned off the car. He sat for a moment in the quiet. Then he got out, went upstairs, and called his son. The call lasted 22 minutes. It was not important. It was completely ordinary. Nathan complained about geometry and mentioned that he had tried to make pasta from scratch and it had gone badly, and Marcus told him to try it with a different flour next time, which was advice he had no particular basis for, but which sounded plausible. Nathan laughed. Marcus sat at his kitchen table and listened to his son laugh, and outside the window the evening was arriving in the slow, mild way San Diego evenings arrive, and the city did what cities do, which is continue, loud and indifferent and full of people going about their lives. He stayed on the phone. He had nowhere else to be. That was enough. After everything, it turned out that was exactly enough.